first, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
Hello, everyone. This is Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler. Thank you for joining us. We are live streaming here from the Fox 12 Oregon newsroom, covering a wide range of topics every day throughout the afternoon. So thanks for being a part of it. You can check out all of our segments afterward at kptv.com under the Fox 12 Now tab or the Fox 12 Oregon app, or of course on YouTube. And I'm going to guess, if you're on YouTube, some people may have some opinions they want to voice about the topic today. So what we're going to be covering here is some poll research, some data that has come in based on polling, asking in part this question that you see below here, but some other questions as well. But what do Oregonians think about public schools? And we're going to get into all of this, of course, with John Horvick here from DHM Research. And always great to have John here on the show. And, John, I think, just for everybody who maybe, if this is their first time watching, I think it's really important for everybody to know how you go about collecting this data, because it's pretty impressive.
Sure. So this is a survey of 500 Oregonians. We randomly select them to be representative of the state. So we pay real close attention to, geography and age and gender and how people align politically and income, all those different things that we know shape people's attitudes. So what we get back are the opinions of folks who look and hopefully have opinions like the typical Oregonian. And then we can also, because we have these different groups, we can say, are there differences between, different types of people? We'll do that too. Yeah,
and so it really is a good sampling of, everything, every kind of demographic that you can think of there when it comes down to it. And for this one, the general premise here, I think, is what's on there. But can you give me just, if you have an idea of why it was that you wanted to go about this particular poll?
So at DHM, we conduct our own research on a regular basis, and we try to mix up the topics. Some of them are to be real timely, to be part of the conversation that people are having, and some things we go back to frequently because they're just consistently important issues to Oregonians. And we go talk to Oregonians about our public schools from time to time. This is an opportunity to do that. I will say it was important, we felt, at this particular moment. We went through a school year where some of the largest school districts in the state had real financial troubles and strikes. And Portland Public Schools in particular had a particularly long strike. So we wanted to know, how are people thinking about schools now, given a pretty rough year. Also, we're coming off of several years of COVID and how schools are responding to that. I would say also the governor and other, policymakers in the state are signaling that they will want to address K-12 funding in the upcoming 2025 legislative session too. So we thought it was timely for that reason as well.
Yeah, that's a lot of things happening kind of all at once that everybody certainly experienced here. You mentioned Portland Public Schools having theirs. I think Salem Kaiser went through it. So some big school districts going through some things like that. Well, taking a look here at the data, I'm going to go ahead and get this pulled up. Starting off, there was this one just to taking a look at how people feel about the funding here. Maybe you can walk through some of this data with us.
Right. So we're going to look at a slide in a second. It's going to show Oregonians are pretty negative about the schools. And a consequence of that could be that they feel that they don't want to invest in them because perhaps they think they don't do a good job. We don't trust them. We don't think they're going to spend their money well. Or people might feel like, things aren't going well. I have real concerns, and therefore we should make some investments in them to make the improvements. So we asked a pretty general question, understanding that the world's more complicated in these two sides, but just to get a sense of where people lean. On the one side, do you feel like the K-12 schools have a real funding problem? Or on the other side, schools do not have a funding problem. If they just spent their money better, they could do fine with what they have. It's not overwhelming, but 55%, that's the majority, did think that schools in Oregon have a funding problem. Just a third said, just spend it better and you'd be okay. There are some differences, as you would expect, always with a question of public financing, a question of taxes. There's going to be some partisan differences. So we see on the bottom there on the left that 60% of Democrats say funding problem compared to just 36% of Republicans. Partisanship and geography, in Oregon connect a lot. So we do see a little bit of a difference there too by area of the state. But I think the big takeaway here is that although it's not an 80-20 proposition, a majority of Oregonians do agree that schools have a challenge that needs to be met with more dollars.
And that's something, obviously, with these upcoming legislative sessions and everything that's happening is probably why they're wanting to address a lot of that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think, let's see, and excuse me if I'm jumping ahead on the slides here, but taking a look at
Right.
this one here, I thought this was pretty interesting too. And what grade would you give your local public schools? Which I do think is always interesting, how people look at their local versus,
Right.
the state as a whole.
Right. There's different ways to ask questions like this. We could ask people if they felt positive or negative or approved or disapproved. But because we're talking about schools here, we thought we would use the same sort of scale. And so people had an opportunity to give a letter grade. And then we can calculate a GPA as well. And we can look at the GPA if we sort of think about our A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's and average them out. Just a 2.0. And that's, it's sort of a barely passing grade. Think of your C's as sort of your you're doing okay, but not well. If you look at the lower end of the scale, so if you add up the dark green lines are like the total, all Oregonians. We'll kind of focus on the light green lines in a second, but if we look at all Oregonians, it's that 34% C, 16% D, 9% F. That means 59% of Oregonians are giving their local schools a C or lower. These are unimpressive numbers. Now, we also broke out the results of those who have kids in the household. So, maybe there's a difference between those who, are experiencing the schools more directly by way of their children. The grades are just a tick better, but basically the takeaway is the same. Oregonians are pretty negative about their schools. Now, just some context, we asked this question several years ago, and these were about the same numbers. So, things haven't gotten worse. On the other hand, we've passed big state policies to invest in schools, and Oregonians are not telling us at this point that they're seeing a big improvement. And the other thing I'd say is that it's going to be very tempting to look at the results and tell an Oregon story. And no doubt there are Oregon stories to tell. Also, we asked this question just recently in Washington state. Now, we haven't had a chance to put the numbers out in the public yet, but I'll just tell you that the numbers in Washington state look very similar to Oregon. So whatever issues Oregon is having, know that our neighbor to the north is also struggling with having a public school system where people feel a lot of confidence in.
Wow. I mean, I think that's an interesting correlation. I wonder how that compares nationally, if it's more of a national thing or if it really is a Northwest thing here with Oregon and Washington, and how people are feeling about those schools.
Yeah, I wish I had that national data. There again, I just would really like. It would be tempting to say that things are bad in Oregon because of things that are very Oregon specific, and that's probably some truth to that. But when you're thinking about that, know that Washington's challenges are different. Their financing is different, and they're similarly struggling to have positive opinions about their schools.
Something else that I know a lot of people have opinions about is whether or not students in middle school or high school should have cell phones in the class. And I saw that this is something that you actually asked about. We've got this here, taking a look at how people are feeling about this. So would you mind breaking this one down here?
Yeah, so this is becoming a really big issue. So we see school districts like North Clackamas School District here in the metro area. They're going to limit access to phones in schools. Governor Kotek has been talking about the need for a statewide policy about how phones are addressed in schools. We asked about this. We'll go through the categories here, but we asked about middle schools and high schools, anticipating that there might be a difference in how people might think that younger students and older students should have access to phones. The other thing I'd say before we dive into specific numbers is there are a lot of different ways you could ask this question. And I want to acknowledge that this isn't the end all, but this is an attempt to try to get it where folks are at. And so from top to bottom, it's more restrictive to more permissive. And so if we look at the statewide numbers, those are the bars on the left. 17% of Oregonians said students should not be allowed to bring smartphones into school at all. So not even into the building. So that's about close to 1 out of 5 Oregonians who say, can't even bring them into the building. Another 25% said they should be required to turn them in when they're in school. So you can bring them to the building, but you got to sock them away somewhere. And I think that is a policy that we're seeing more and more schools adopt. And then the next one down, another 24% said students should be allowed to bring their phones into school, but you can't use them. So those are sort of our most restrictive, and we sort of add that 17, that 25, and that 24 up. We're approaching 2/3 think that middle school students should have phone access pretty severely restricted in the school. either can't bring it in at all or can't use it at all. And then about 30% said that they should be allowed to use smartphones in the school, but not during class. And so that's a little bit more permissive. Now, just look at, we won't talk about the specific numbers, but we did break this down between those who had children in the household and those who didn't. And there are some differences, but there are more similarities than there are differences between parents and parents.
Yeah, it is interesting seeing how it generally lays out like that on people's opinions on this, because I know you had the middle school side of things, which obviously a lot of people have opinions on this, and we even had some news stories that we were running earlier today about different schools trying out different things along these lines. But then you go to the high school side, and taking a look here,
Yeah, so
it does look a little bit different.
Yeah, it does look a little bit different. So Oregonians and parents of children in Oregon are relatively more accommodating to high school students having them. So remember, about 2/3 of Oregonians said that middle school students should have their phones restricted. There's different levels of restriction, but it was about 2/3 of them. So here we're at 12%. Can't bring them to the school. 19%. You can bring them to school, but you have to turn them in, and then 22%. Saying you can bring them to school, but you can't use them. So that's a little over 50% in total. So there is a gap there, more permissiveness in the high school, but still a majority of Oregonians, including a majority of those who have kids in them, think that the phone should be restricted pretty severely, either to not bring them into the school at all or to bring them to school but not have access to them and not be allowed to use them.
And again, for everybody who may just be joining too, I mean, this polls across demographics across Oregon, so really at that cross section of everybody getting this information on there. So
Now, I'm focusing on the restrictions, but if you go back to that quickly, I mean, I probably should say, 41% of all Oregonians, 47% of the, Oregonians with kids in the household think that kids should have access to their phones in school. Some limitations on the use in the classroom, but should have phones in school. That creates a real challenge for administrators, right? To try to navigate those different, types of opinions among their constituents at large throughout the community, parents specifically, of course, the students themselves. These are challenges without obvious right paths forward.
yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, talking about that for the administration. And I guess going back to some of that other polling data, if people are unhappy with the school, for whatever reason it is, unhappy with their local schools giving them that barely passing grade, but yet those administrators have to navigate some pretty stark opinions there, right, when it comes to it. That's not an enviable job, no matter how you feel about that, as far as trying to navigate that line. The other part here too of this data was something that you put out, and it has to do with the birth rate in Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And the birth rate, from what I understand, if you can clarify this, is low in Oregon.
Yeah, so Oregon has one of the lowest birth rates in the country. The birth rate in Oregon has been on decline. The birth rate in America has been on decline. The birth rate in Western countries has been on decline. So there's nothing unusual about that general pattern, although it's been more pronounced here in Oregon. We were interested in looking at this for a couple of reasons. One, Oregon's population has declined in recent years, and so we're also asked another question about just general population decline. I would say that we asked this question before Joe Biden dropped out, before J.D. Vance was the presidential nominee, but you can really see how this connects to some of the national conversations that are happening with sort of the idea of these sort of debates and divisions and arguments about the consequences of people not having kids, or who should, be in power, or how many votes you should get, whether or not you have kids. And so it's part of a larger conversation that's happening. So we took this opportunity to just at least take a peek at how Oregonians were thinking about it. So we asked two questions. We asked one, we let people know, that Oregonians are having fewer children now than in the past. And we just simply asked, is this good or bad? Or people could say neither good or bad. And a plurality, 41%, said it was neither good nor bad. But more people said it was good than bad. 32% said it was good that we're having fewer children. 21% said it was bad. Now, I had anticipated to see some pretty big demographic differences there, that, maybe in particular younger people might have different attitudes than those who are older, or even parents might have different attitudes than those who don't have kids in the household. And by and large, there was much more similarity across demographic groups than differences. Most people felt, this is kind of the way it felt out, whether we're talking older or younger, men or women, different parts of the state, which was a surprise to me. I expected more differences. But more people think it's good that the population is declining, or that fewer people are having fewer children in the past and think it's bad. We did not get an opportunity to ask a follow-up question about why. So like a million sort of reasons or curiosities about these results. Is it people's concerns about climate change? Is it concerns about population density? Is it concerns about any number of other things? I don't know the answer to that, but at least this gives us a reason to keep on asking.
Right, and just to emphasize again, this is the data, this is the polling results. So people who are, if you're leaving your comments and have your opinions on why that is, feel free. But this is how it came out. So that is interesting. Now the other one, which I saw that you had posted too, which is here: should the Oregon state government do more to encourage people to have children? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, and here the results are overwhelming. So on the one hand, with that, well, if people are having fewer children, should the state do something about that, or should they encourage a change in, well, we'll say behavior? And overwhelmingly, people said no. Now, I would be curious to ask this question in different ways. And so this is the answer to the way that we asked it. And there could be pushback, maybe, just I don't want the government interfering with my private lives. It could be that, they don't want people to have more children. There's different explanations for this, but there was definitely a hesitation about the state government getting involved with this pattern. Now, I'll just say that this has enormous ramifications for communities. I mean, just think of schools as we're talking about that. If people have fewer children, and of course that's their absolute, right, and people should make the best choices for themselves. But if they do, student enrollments will decline. That has an impact on the number of schools that are open and school funding. Has all sorts of downstream effects in other ways too. So these are huge societal issues and questions, and we can tell now with sort of the conversation nationally with the presidential election, they're issues that are really becoming to the forefront of conversation.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, you asked this even before all of this going on here, the national conversation regarding that, or at least regarding comments that were said. So definitely going to be something that I feel like a lot of people are thinking about here throughout the rest of the year and going forward with these declining birth rates. But as always, really interesting data and responses just to find out what people are thinking, what their opinions are on this. I'm with you, like the whys. I really am curious about that too, but I'm sure people will. I'm sure there's lots of places to find out why people feel how they feel.
Well, there's a lot of opinions that are out there. I'll just tell you this: it's given us motivation to keep on asking, so that we can know, and then we can also share with others.
Well, and for everybody out there too who wants to take a closer look at some of this data and some of the different research that you do, because there's so many great ones, what's the best place for them to do so?
Go right to our website, dhmresearch.com, and then there's a page there called Insights, and you'll find the results to this study and dozens of more. We try to make public what we can and share what we have, and you're all welcome to it.
All right. Well, John, as always, really good to have you on here, have this conversation, and just walk through this stuff and finding out, just getting the pulse of how people are feeling on any number of these subjects, but this one in particular, really interesting. Always like having you on here. And for everybody who's watching live, this is Fox 12 Now. We're live here every weekday afternoon, covering these wide range of topics here. And I encourage you all to check it out at kptv.com under the Fox 12 Now tab or the Fox 12 Oregon app. You can watch all the other segments that we get to have on here too. But John, thanks for joining us. Always appreciate it.
Thank you.
And for everybody watching, I'll talk to you soon. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now.